Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Russia's attack on Ukraine 9 months ago brought with it protests across Europe, most of them in support of Kiev, but not all of them. There have been more than a few demonstrations recently calling for Europe to end its support of Ukraine and bring an end to the conflict, whatever it takes. Some protests are just outright pro-Russian. Well, is the discontent because the conflict is causing high energy bills and the cost of living crisis that are causing so much pain to Europeans? Or is something else at play here? Good to have you with us. I'm David Foster. Pro-Russia and anti-sanction demonstrators have been seen in countries including the Czech Republic, Ireland, and even in Germany. The banners and slogans at most of those protests talk about the cost to ordinary Europeans of taking Ukraine's side, and they're often anti-NATO. However, there are those who speculate that far from being organic, the hand of the Kremlin is behind the unrest. So is Moscow to blame, or are people just looking to vent their anger in a time of upheaval? Let us head first of all to Milan in Italy, and there we see Jana Kazaz, Research Fellow at Globsec Centre for Democracy and Resilience. And in London, we welcome back Anna Matveeva, Visiting Senior Research Fellow at the Russia Institute, King's College, London. Anna, what do you see here with these protests?
I see that we are looking into a winter of discontent. We see just the albatross of things to come because people have been really struggling, both with the cost of living, also with escalating energy prices, with stagnant salaries. There is a lot of pent-up frustration after COVID. People just started to come out of that, and there is a new blow. And also, some countries will experience already a certain degree of fatigue with the numbers of Ukrainian refugees who are coming in, and they provide welcome and accommodation, but it also started to create, in some countries, certain frictions.
None of which means that they are now supporting Russia anymore. It's just that their support for Russia may be tailing off a little bit, correct?
Yes, I would say that we have protests of different kind of groups. Some people have been politically active a long time before, leftist groups, also far-right groups, but we're also seeing people in the streets who never really took much action, who have not been very political, but they feel that they are having already with their back pushed to the corner, and they do not see any end in sight. They do not see that things would get better. They're seeing only a scenario that things are going to get worse. What unites all sorts of groups there, they started to distrust more and more their national leaderships. They are saying that national leaderships have been elected for the government to look first and foremost after own people. What are you doing to help us? And they are looking for answers.
I suppose.
So distrust,
Anna, back with you in just a minute. Sorry, but I'd want to bring Jana in at this particular point. All of which must be a concern for Kiev, because while governments are saying we support you, governments in the West are saying we support you, we're 100% behind you. If there is a growing anti-invasion, attack, conflict movement, if you like, people are becoming a little bit weary of what's going on. How do you maintain public support?
That's a good question. But I would go back to the basic premise that if this is like growing discontent with war and everything, or if there is an anti-war street protest spreading across Europe, I would agree with most of the statements of Anna said, but I would just not see them as negative or as, how to say, with a dramatic change over the winter. So, for example, we see protests happening, discontent with the governments, of course, like energy prices are rising. but we still measure a strong support for NATO, for example. So these protests that are happening are, of course, like understandable, because as Anna pointed rightfully, they are coming different groups of society together that would normally don't meet, but they have similar issues. But still, it doesn't mean that the citizens would not support Ukraine, for example. In September, there were a lot of protests in Germany, it was reported, but the public opinion poll showed that 70% of Germans favor supporting Ukraine despite energy high bills.
Yeah, but
And
perhaps
another-
the price rises have yet to kick in fully. You mentioned there Germany. We'll get to Germany at the bottom of this list. But Prague, Czech Republic, 70,000 protesters just a few months ago. Moldova, 7,000. Belgrade, 4,650 people. Hanover in Germany, all to, I don't know whether it's written here, gather to support Russia, or I'm wondering whether in fact it's more gather to say they were tired of support for Ukraine. And they're two very different things, Jana, aren't they?
Well, for example, you mentioned Prague protest that was indeed huge, but this was mainly anti-government protest, which was both anti-EU, anti-NATO, and we know now that they were organized. This protest was organized by people actively spreading Russian disinformation in the country, and they were also part of the COVID-19 anti-vax movement. So another issue to mention is that at the same time we did polling in Czech Republic, which saw 75% people blaming Russia for the war and only 13% US or NATO. So what happened there, that very skilled people in organizing these different groups came together, these groups that were already dissatisfied with situation during the COVID-19, dissatisfied with government. This was not a pro-Russia or anti-Ukraine demonstration. This was not anti-war. It was anti-establishment. All groups really successfully brought together into this really big mass demonstration.
How very interesting. So they want to spread disinformation because they are against the line that they're being given on pretty much everything by their own governments. It's not necessarily to do with the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. But I do hear that there is a movement out there, paid for, many say, by the Kremlin, that is spreading anti-Ukrainian, anti-Western propaganda to get these protests going. Are these people, Anna, you on this one, are these people working together, the anti-establishment and the anti-West groups here?
I think it's very difficult to make a casual connection. I think the Western governments, or in fact nobody, asked citizens of European countries how much they are prepared to pay the price for war in Ukraine and how much they are going to contribute to it with the expense of their own well-being, and also crucially how long that would last. Because the initial aspiration, yes, correctly, there was more support towards Ukraine, but the idea was that it is all going to be over soon. Now we are looking at a scenario that it may continue indefinitely. We are in quite different situation. Secondly, yes, there is a sense of, yes, we need sovereignty. We do not want to listen to the US, to Brussels institutions, to some kind of supranational government. We want to decide. And we do not want to be a kind of marionette in the hands of US or NATO or somebody else. Whether Russia can organize anything of this order, I strongly doubt. The channels of influence are really minimal. There is no space for RT, for Sputnik, for social media. Most of these channels are completely blocked. But in previous era, they managed to create some kind of political and social capital within certain constituencies within European countries, which now started to generate its own movement.
Okay, I'm going to go to Jana because she's listening to what you have to say and she's shaking her head in disagreement. We allow disagreements on this program. We just don't like arguments. So, Jana, you, and then we'll be back with you in a moment, Anna.
These are not arguments, but I would disagree that Russian channels or Russian narratives were spread only by RT or Sputnik. This is not so. Russia, since 2015, actively is supporting disinformation groups active, especially on social media across all Europe. It's now, we have reports from England, from US, that is proven that they were meddling in elections. I mean, this is not something new or something that would be really doubtful whether it's happening. There are independent investigations that have been done that shows that Russia is actively trying to infiltrate all groups. And it's well known that...
So you both agree that there is some kind of involvement from Moscow, from the Kremlin, in trying to destabilize Western society, whether it be through these protests or other movements, elections, etc., etc. Jana, you first, and then back to you. Anna, how are they doing this? How are they getting more and more people out on the streets when we're talking about the protests? What are they doing?
So since the malign influence operations of Russia are lasting already a long time before the war started, they managed to establish these groups on Facebook and on all other social networks, which are basically word by word spreading their Russian narratives. And these were growing unchecked, uncontrolled, long time before the war started. So now, even if Russia would not actively support them, they already live their own life. They were already seeded. They are already in our society, and they were really successful.
But I'm asking rather, how are they planting the seed that what is happening in Ukraine is not now so much Russia's fault as NATO, the West's fault? How are they going about that? Is it just sort of fake media posts? Anna, you first, then back to you, Jana. So Anna, difficult to get between the two of you with your names, but Anna, that's you first on this one.
I don't think that Russia can or is capable of doing anything of this order right now. First, a Russian propaganda machine was not really even ready for this kind of war, because Putin thought that it will be all over within the next few days and no preparation is needed. Yes, it's true that in previous period, Russia had influencing channels. People do listen to Russia's perspective on international affairs. It is not always fault. It is not always false. Yes, there are people who feel that they have to pay a price for somebody else's decisions, and that's not fair. So yes, there is grassroots activism which is coming out from society. Whether there have been some people among these groups who used to consume Russian media or have been generally sympathetic to Russian point of view, or generally also did not see Ukraine in completely innocent life, something isn't there, but it is a European phenomena. It's not of Russia's doing, and I think we have to prepare to deal with this as a widespread social phenomena.
Maya Sandu, you both know who I'm talking about, the president of Moldova, which is right on the border with Ukraine, making a very valid point here.
This war is endangering the supply of electricity and gas. We are not certain we can find enough volumes to heat and light our homes. And even if we do, the prices are unaffordable for our people and economy. This could jeopardize our social peace and security. I know everyone in Europe pays a very high price for energy, but these same prices have a much more ruinous impact on our country and people.
The point from the president of Moldova there, Jana, is that not only is Russia able to strangle Europe from the point of view of cutting back on its energy supplies, but in doing so, it makes people extremely uncomfortable and thereby perhaps benefits the Russian propaganda that, hang on, we could end this war if you weren't supporting Ukraine quite so much. So it's coming from both sides, but the same missile, if you like.
It's like negotiating with terrorists, you know. The Russia is really unreliable partner when it comes to energy right now. They started to shrink their energy supplies to Europe before the war already, and they were playing with it as they liked. So since Russia cut us off, actually European Union managed to stock alternative energy from alternative sources. It was quite miraculous because they secured this winter. At the same time,
I understand that the alternative arrangements have been made. But my question is, not only do the lights go off, but people get more disgruntled and unhappy with the Western governments that the Russians are saying have caused this.
But Western governments didn't cause it. That's the thing. Russia caused it by shelling the Ukraine and killing the grid, which is providing electricity also for Moldova. So actually what they are doing is really like committing war crimes, but actually endangering lives of so many people in Ukraine.
And that I understand also. I'm saying from the point of view of the Russian propaganda machine, they are trying to spin it.
Yes, indeed.
They're trying to spin it the way that I just suggested.
We have a project when we are measuring the energy-linked disinformation narratives in our country. And this is exactly what is coming through. One of the arguments that these channels that are always word by word spreading Russian disinformation is that as energy crisis is exactly responsibility of Western governments and so on, because the war goes on, we are supplying the weapons and so on. We see that they are spreading this. But also, I would like to point out one fact about this alleged spreading of anti-war unrest in Europe and picturing it really black. So one point that I mentioned is that this winter is secured with alternative energy sources. So we won't be in cold like Ukrainians are, or without the light like Ukrainians are at the moment in Kiev and elsewhere. Second thing is that the recovery plans are just kicking in most of the European Union countries, which are on spot, bringing lots of investment to different segments of society that people will see right away. So actually, I think these unrests won't go and growing exponentially because there is activity that is linked to EU, that is linked to West going on at the moment.
Anna, what is your feeling on this one? I don't know whether they would grow exponentially anyway, but grow incrementally might be another way of putting it. But Anna, do you think that there is enough support from the financial recovery package which is being given to European countries to cushion the effects of the energy problems that they're going to be this winter, and therefore that the protests will not be able to grow? Or do you think something else?
Absolutely not, because in quite a number of European countries, people have to pay 3 times more for the energy they consume. Yes, the EU is now devising solutions. Most of them are long-term. They require significant investment. They would not benefit everybody equally. So we have seen quite mild temperatures so far. If we are going to see much colder temperatures, we still have 4 cold months ahead of us, and probably very miserable Christmas for some countries. Yes, we are going to see short-term challenges, which the governments would be seriously considering how they cope with that. The society would be asking why they should be paying the price, who did ask them to pay this price, for how long they're going to pay this price. So yes, the potential for discontent is there. Whether that would be enough to change policy of the European Union, I doubt. I think that they will continue with what they are doing now, and we will face the consequences which can be probably quite volatile.
Growing disquiet, perhaps among the population, perhaps engineered by the Russian propaganda machine, but not perhaps being helped by some of the major figures within Europe who are expressing their disquiet. We've got this from the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, whose party is now part of the Italian government coalition. He said, "I have re-established relations with President Putin quite a bit. For my birthday, he sent me 20 bottles of vodka and a very sweet letter. I replied with bottles of Lambrusco and an equally very sweet letter. I have been one of his first 5 real friends." Okay, Now, that's all rather jokey, but the point is that once you get heavyweight politicians like this putting their oar in, others are encouraged to follow, and intergovernmental support perhaps collapses a little bit. Jana?
I don't think that this will be the case in Italy because although there are supporters of Putin like Berlusconi and also Salvini, they didn't do that well in elections. And government is currently led by Giorgia Meloni, and she made sure that they will have to express their support for NATO, specifically during the coalition negotiations. And she said that no such a thing as a pro-Russian like tendencies will be tolerated. So she gave them sort of an ultimatum that either you are in my government and you are pro-NATO and you are supporting Ukraine, or you are not.
Well, she's saying she supports Ukraine until she doesn't say she supports Ukraine because there's growing disquiet. Anna, let me ask you this. Other than, let's say, Berlusconi and a few other people, maybe even Orban, but what we see with Litvinenko, not Lukashenko in Belarus, who on the European side is showing a little bit more generosity, if you like, towards Russia at the moment, which might encourage their people to protest?
I don't think that Western governments can say that. I don't think that they genuinely want to support Putin or be seen as supporting Putin. But some of Western governments are more hesitant in terms of squeezing their own population. They also sometimes feel that they are more on the kind of push to the corner. If we look at Czech Republic, if we look at Germany, we see that their governments certainly not buying into Russian position, but thinking how much we can sustain this course, and maybe there is some point when we need to reassess. And of course, government of Hungary is a case of point, always been sort of in and out of that, playing quite skillful game in a way. If we look at Serbia, again, its president has been very flexible, trying to be kind of with both sides and to some extent drawing benefits from those. But I think it's more fear rather than sympathy towards Russia that would make politics eventually change. Especially
are we talking about heavyweight countries such as France with Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz in Germany? Are we talking about Giorgia Meloni expressing perhaps support in the future for what is going on, or disquiet with what the West is doing? Is that where you've got to look for problems?
We first should look at countries which are the most energy deprived. France has nuclear energy, so the situation is not that bad. Germany is certainly very much a country which produces a lot, so it's not just household consumption, it's also energy for production, so its economy can be brought to its knees if situation goes on like this. It has quite a large minority of people who are sort of more sympathetic towards a Russian perspective. It does not mean that they fully support it or enthusiastic about it. So governments are in different situations vis-a-vis that energy crisis. And also we have to say that it was the EU decision to put a cap on oil price, to introduce all sorts of restrictions. So we'll say it is a European decision. You cannot say that it is just what Putin has done.
Jana, I've recently been in Italy talking, among other things, about the cost of living there and support for Ukraine, and came across a lot of people who said there's going to come a time, if it hasn't come already, when we're feeling the pinch and we're watching money being given by a government to people elsewhere when it should be given to us. How do you know when a tipping point has been reached and that your support for what is going on in the conflict against Russia is actually a political liability? Because tell me that politicians aren't pragmatic, and I won't believe you, because they'll be looking after their own political lives, won't they?
There is one interesting aspect to it, which is not very well known, but there is really little support in Italy for sending weapons to Ukraine among citizens, right? And if politicians like Meloni wanted to use it in a political campaign before she was elected, she could, because she would mobilize more votes, but she didn't. So there is definitely like this feeling that already in the society, the thing is that politicians are still resilient to it.
Okay, quick one for you, Anna, because we've only got about a minute left. Are we going to see more and more protests, or are these just something that ripples on the surface and they're going to go away?
Absolutely, we're going to see more protests. We are going to see more ugly protests, and we are going to see more violence in European streets. I think it is an ugly protest, but we really need to factor it in.
Yep, compassionate overload, perhaps that's what we're seeing here. Encouraged by Moscow, but not discouraged by some people who are friends with Putin. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming on the programme. Thank you wherever you're watching this edition of Roundtable. Until next time, goodbye.